Okay, all right. Our next presenter is Dr. Jonathan Van Senton from the Virginia Tech University, and he's going to talk to us about impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on the U.S. aquaculture industry. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone, and thanks to USAS and our sponsors today for the opportunity to participate in this virtual session. My name is Jonathan Van Senton. I'm an assistant professor extension specialist at the Virginia Seafood Agriculture Research and Extension Center, VSAREC, we like to call it to keep things simpler. And I'm here to talk to you today about the impacts of COVID-19 on the U.S. aquaculture industry. I'd like to start by thanking all of the farms and businesses that participated in the study and all of those that helped us to distribute the survey instrument to industry and other stakeholders. Really, we couldn't have done this without the support of industry and all of these various contacts that are just simply too many to name individually. So I just want to extend our gratitude to everybody and acknowledge their support that made all of this possible. I want to provide a little bit of background and justification for why we started doing this work, and then I'll delve deeper into the actual results of the survey work so far. On January 20th was the first confirmed case of COVID-19 in the United States, which followed then, of course, the declaration of a pandemic and a national emergency in the United States. This led to the closure of non-essential businesses and the implementation of social distancing measures to protect public health. Now, agriculture, aquaculture, and aquaponics included were then clarified to be essentials industries, and operation of these industries was allowed to continue. But the effects of closures of non-essential businesses and social distancing and stay-at-home orders did have impacts on agriculture and, by extension, then of course also aquaculture and aquaponics. I mentioned in my introduction I'm an extension specialist. I work with other extension specialists. So with communications with producers, we had been hearing anecdotal evidence of lost sales, reports of production challenges and other issues happening at the farm. And really, in response to the information that we were getting from producers, Matthew Smith at The Ohio State University proposed that we assess the impacts of COVID-19 on the U.S. aquaculture industry overall. And so that's what started this collaborative effort to collect the data and assess impacts with the support of industry associations like the National Aquaculture Association and others, and other individual producers, of course. So a little bit on the methods. Data collection is happening through a quarterly survey that's being administered online through Qualtrics. Of course, when the pandemic started, we were under university-imposed restrictions in terms of research activities and travel. And then the only way to reach a broad enough group to reach the nation was to go online in such a rapid format. Now, there is no sampling protocol. Respondents are self-selecting for participation. This is largely because there was no time to organize formal contact lists for every state, which is the real challenge. And therefore, we decided to just cast as wide a net as we could and make sure we distribute the announcements as widely as possible. The Q1 period that I'll be discussing today covers the period from January through April 10th of 2020. That's when that first survey closed. The Q2 period runs then from April 10th to June 29th, which is when the second quarter survey closed. Now, before I dig into the results, I do want to just point out that given the high dependence of aquaculture products generally on restaurants and other in-dining establishments, it's possible that non-respondents experience similar impacts in terms of the disruption of traditional marketing channels, challenges with farm labor, and challenges with inputs, goods, and services, like I'll be talking about here today. And what I mean when I refer to that is, if we look at the USDA census, which is really one of the few sources of information for aquaculture on a national scale that we have, you know, this information that they've collected and summarized here in the latest census shows the different first point of sale for aquaculture products in the US. And so one important factor for US aquaculture, responsible for much of the economic hardship experienced by producers, is that a significant portion of seafood expenditures occur at food service establishments in the US. So this table here gives you a depiction of that first point of sale. And you can see that, generally speaking, the direct-to-consumer marketing channel has the lower percentages of sales for these sectors of aquaculture that are listed here. So again, that's one of the reasons why I think we see some of the effects, the economic effects that we did in the study, which we're going to get to now. So understanding who our respondents are, who are the people that provided this data, is critically important. Here is the summary of respondents who participated in the Q1 and Q2 surveys. The first survey had a total of 652 participants, of which 537 responses were sufficiently complete for analysis. That represents approximately 18% of the number of farms listed on the 2018 USDA census of aquaculture, which the total number there was 2,932. We did see lower participation in Q2. We had a total of 256 participants, of which 248 responses were sufficiently complete for analysis, which represents about 8% of the number of farms reporting on the census. There's a lot of reasons we think that Q2 had lower participation. It's not atypical with these types of surveys that are sent out periodically to see participation decline in subsequent surveys, but also because some of the information in terms of different sectors of aquaculture experiencing different effects, we think that likely also played a role in lower participation, where some people did have an opportunity to continue sales or pick up because of their traditional marketing periods, which may have led to them choosing not to participate due to time constraints. Again, looking at our respondents, the characteristics here based on the regions, I've listed the USDA census regions breakdown here: the southern region, northeast, western, north central, tropical, and subtropical. Individual responses are of course kept confidential, but it's still important for us to understand who the respondents to the survey were. So you can see here the USDA census breakdown of where farms fall within these regions, and then for our Q1 and Q2 survey respondents, likewise that breakdown. You can see that we have a little bit of underrepresentation in the southern region in our survey respondents, and then a little bit of overrepresentation of the northeast region primarily. The north central had some fluctuation there as well, with a little bit of overrepresentation in Q1 and underrepresentation in Q2, and the western region with underrepresentation in Q1 and a little bit of overrepresentation in Q2. So the primary products produced by our respondents, here you can see the Q1, Q2. I think immediately what jumps out, of course, is mollusks. Mollusks accounted for the largest portion of our respondents in both Q1 and Q2 surveys, followed by food fish. These percentages are a little bit higher than on the USDA census. The USDA census had about 30% of respondents were mollusk producers, and 37% were food fish producers. So a little bit of overrepresentation in our study on mollusks and underrepresentation of food fish. Scale of production, this one was a little bit more challenging to compare. So here you see again Q1 in maroon, Q2 in orange. We did have some non-response. We did have some people that elected not to share their pre-COVID scales of production. You can see here that we had about a little under a quarter of respondents that were over the $1 million in annual sales scale of production. And then a few respondents that were in the sub $25,000 a year in annual sales categories as well. And we also did ask about primary marketing channels, like I alluded to in my introduction earlier. Some of the effects that we see is because of the traditional marketing channels for aquaculture products in the US that were affected with the shutdowns and closures of non-essential industry sectors. So we did ask our respondents what their traditional primary marketing channels were. And here you see that for Q1 and Q2 respondents. The largest group did sell through a distributor. That was followed then by a processor or direct to consumer, depending on which quarter of the survey we looked at. And then some smaller percentages that went to direct to restaurants or direct to grocery stores, and then also other producers. There was again some non-response here, so that's also something to account for. Okay, so this is the first slide that really gets at the some of the results from the study. I'm gonna put up the Q1 and Q2 separately for these, and then later some of these will be combined on one graph to make it easier to interpret across the two quarters. Both of these survey results contain a lot of information, and so I'm only going to cover some of the questions and topics in detail for this presentation today, and I'm going to focus primarily on the average result across all segments. Some of these charts will break that down in more disaggregated levels, such as this one, where you see catfish, trout, tilapia, sport fish, and other sectors broken out. But many of my charts will just focus on the overall average across the industry, which is labeled here as all segments. The reports, disaggregated reports, are available publicly online, and I will share that link towards the end of this presentation for anyone that has an interest to look those up, because there are a lot of nuances and variability between some of these different sectors as we dig into the data further. So just looking at this is asking folks about lost sales and canceled contracts in Q1. You can see that respondents reported different kinds of lost sales or contracts that were affected. Lost domestic sales, very high percentage of our respondents here that you see in all cases over 60% basically said that they had experienced lost domestic sales. Also high percentage of respondents that had experienced canceled private contracts. Less so with canceled government contracts, but that may also be likely because not many producers have government contracts. And then also respondents that had lost sales to export markets. You see that those are a little higher with the ornamental and crustacean sectors than in some of the others. Again, very, very variable results across industry sectors, which really emphasizes the need to look at this at a disaggregated level. Some of the effects and impacts are different based on the species or the market, the intended end market for the product. So this is that the same information from the Q2 survey, covering that period from April 10th to the end of June. You can see here that we didn't break out as many disaggregated sectors. That's due to the lower response. Again, the survey information is confidential, so if we don't have enough respondents in a category, we've chosen not to publish that information. But you see here kind of the similar trend, producers still experiencing lost domestic sales, not quite as high as in Q1 in some cases, but still experiencing that issue and still having some private contracts canceled. And we decided to ask also about delays. So here you see that some producers responded that they were having delays, private contracts delayed. And then also still some losses to export markets that were being experienced even in Q2. So we asked folks about the value of these lost sales in Q1 and Q2, and so this is just the overall average across the all respondents, not any specific sector. Again, some small portion of non-response here, but the Q1 and Q2 data fairly similar when compared to each other. You know, under 25,000 was the largest percentage of respondents in both Q1 and Q2 in terms of lost sales. And then we did see the 50,000 to 100,000 and 100,000 to $250,000 ranges pop up as well in terms of responses from the lost sales in Q1 and Q2. Again, I think it's important to point out that there are differences across sectors in both Q1 and Q2, which are not reflected here because this is just the average across the industry. So another critical thing that we asked about on the survey was labor. We asked about challenges both in terms of terminations, but also labor shortages due to illness and shelter at home policies. There's a whole series of questions on our survey that are pertaining to labor, but I've really only picked three of them here to share and discuss today in the interest of time. So looking at some of these effects on labor, we asked folks if they had ended up laying off employees, if there was no change in employment, if they would have to soon lay off employees. And then in Q2, we added the option to indicate that folks had hired additional employees. Looking at that first table on the left, you can see that 33% of respondents in Q1 had laid off employees, so a third of our respondents, and then over a quarter still in Q2 indicated that they had terminated employees. But 40%, 50% of our respondents had no change in both Q1 and Q2. A quarter of our respondents in Q1 did say that they would have to soon lay off employees, where that was 15% in Q2. And in Q2, that new option in terms of having hired additional employees, only 5% of our respondents indicated that they had done that during the second quarter. So of course, a follow-up to this then was to ask how many employees this affected. And you can see that in both Q1 and 2, the majority of our respondents indicated that it was between 1 and 3 employees affected by termination. That was followed by 4 to 6, again, in both Q1 and Q2. Now, we did have a few instances where respondents indicated over 20 employees had been terminated. And in some of these individual cases, that number was well in excess of 100. But again, the individual responses are confidential. So when we asked folks about having to make a decision soon, that was really to try and get a sense of you know, what might be coming down the pipeline in subsequent quarters of the year as these ripple effects continue throughout the industry. So the number of weeks that people indicated they had to make a decision on further terminations, we see that varied between Q1 and Q2. So in Q1, the majority, over half of our respondents indicated that they had between 1 and 3 weeks to make additional decisions on terminations of employees. And in Q2, that was a little bit longer. The respondents there, 61% indicating that they had between 4 and 6 weeks to make additional decisions on terminations. So another topic that we asked folks about on the survey was about production challenges. You may have noticed that the 3 themes that are emerging here in my talk are lost sales or effects on revenue, effects on labor, and then effects with production. So this is just one question that kind of gets at some of what we saw in the survey, asking respondents about and participants about different challenges that they've experienced with regards to production. So I think, you know, looking here across the Q1, Q2 respondents, you see that some respondents, 22% in Q1 and 10% in Q2, were not able to identify at the time of completing the survey the exact nature of the challenges that they were experiencing. But you can see here that 43% in the first quarter and 46% in the second quarter did experience challenges with production inputs, so obtaining production inputs, and that 32% in the first quarter and 28% in the second quarter had challenges with repair, construction, consultant, engineering services, and that there were also respondents, about 30%, that had financial challenges. Other challenges varied, again, by sector. It was a little bit difficult to summarize some of the unique challenges that some of the sectors were experiencing, but that could be related to very specific things in cases of different species productions or inputs required. But this is really driven by the closure of these other sectors of the economy, such as construction, consulting, engineering, which have then resulted in disruptions to traditional production activities on the farm. So that's really what this is suggesting and pointing to. I also want to note that these percentages don't add up to 100, because this question asked respondents to select all that apply. So therefore, the same respondent could have indicated that multiple of these was a challenge for them. So that just to clarify that too. Okay, I want to take a little bit of time and talk a little bit more specifically about the quarter two survey response. We asked some additional questions here. Obviously, as you do these surveys, you get new information, both from direct communications with the associations and producers, but also from the survey responses themselves. You know, during quarter one, the government announced a series of programs that were intended to provide relief and support to agricultural and other sectors of the economy. So those were things that we incorporated in our quarter two survey that I want to talk a little bit more about now. So one of the questions that was new in quarter two was asking about the availability of cash on hand. And that did include any financial assistance loans that were received. So we did ask respondents about this, and you can see that 25%, quarter of our respondents, indicated that they had about 1 to 3 months of cash on hand to cover operations, cover operating costs. That was followed then by 21% that indicated they had about 4 to 6 months. After that, you see as the time period increases, the percentages drop off. And we did have a few respondents, as you can see here, 3%, that indicated they had less than a week's worth of cash on hand, and then 9% that indicated they had no cash available whatsoever to cover operating expenses, which is very troubling. So when asking, we also asked participants about the loans or financial assistance. This result presented here, this graph, shows the percentage of respondents that had applied for these programs in quarter two. So we'll discuss what was received in a moment, but this is in terms of programs that were applied for during the second quarter. And you can see that about half of our respondents had applied for the Paycheck Protection Program, followed by a third that had applied for economic injury disaster loans. There were also some respondents that had gone with personal or private bank loans or personal lines of credit, and then about 18% that had small business administration loans. We did have 13% of our respondents indicate that they had not requested any type of financial assistance. That could be for various reasons. Of course, it's something that every business has to make a decision on, given their current financial situation, whether taking on more debt is the wise thing to do for them. So that's something that I think, just because the funds are available, everyone needs to make that calculus and consideration given the position, the financial position of their individual business. We also saw that some respondents had applied for other federal programs, other state programs, and local programs.
4 minutes.
So this shows the actual programs that respondents received assistance from. in Q2. So 90% of those who had applied for a Paycheck Protection Program support had received that. So you can see here all over 50% in terms of those that had applied for those programs actually receiving that assistance. We did have some farms, respondents, 9%, that had applied but had not yet received anything. And as a small percentage of our respondents indicated that they had been declined, their application had been declined. Okay, so we also asked, because of the anecdotal evidence that we had gathered through, again, our extension contacts, we had been hearing that folks have been trying to adapt, which is, I think, a very positive note, right, to see that people are adapting to the conditions. And so we asked about implementing new marketing channels. We know that the major disruption was the traditional marketing channels in Q1. So we did ask about whether folks had tried to implement a new marketing channel in Q2. You see that a third of our respondents said yes, followed by that they had already implemented a new marketing channel, and 10% that said that they were in process. There were 45% that said no, they hadn't, and then 11% that gave no response. So following up with those that had developed a new marketing channel, we asked them what kind of channel that was. And it really surprised me to see that 70% of those that had developed a new marketing channel had gone for online sales. Then curbside pickup was the next largest group, was 59%, and home delivery 44%. So I thought that was really interesting to see, and I think it's a positive note to show that the industry is adapting. People are trying to make changes. So I'm nearly out of time, but I'm also getting towards the end here, so that's working out. So I guess the major impacts and effects that I've covered here today and that we saw from the results in Q1 and Q2 are the lost sales, labor challenges, and production challenges. Just to summarize quickly, the lost sales are primarily because of the result of disrupted traditional marketing channels due to the closures of restaurants and other food service establishments. There were disruptions at processors as well due to fears of COVID-19 outbreaks, which had an impact on farm sales. And then, of course, the cascading effects of market channel disruptions and the resulting loss of revenues. And therefore, we conclude that it's very likely to present U.S. aquaculture with continued challenges for the duration of 2020 and likely beyond. In terms of labor challenges, farm impacts were driven primarily by the loss of revenue from marketing of this channel disruptions that I mentioned earlier. In addition to terminations, we did also hear about temporary loss, so furloughs and also salary cuts. Respondents did raise concerns about loss of specialized and skilled labor, and also expressed concern about the health and well-being of their employees, noting efforts to implement revised protocols for safety, and then also the purchase of personal protective equipment for COVID-19. And in terms of the production challenges, just to summarize those, there were issues experienced with production-related challenges, noted that holding inventory of market-ready products would interfere with the ability to start production of future crops. So that's something that we're going to continue to watch going forward with our surveys. Again, this would suggest that the disruptions caused by COVID-19 may result in a shortage of products beyond 2020 if producers are not able to start production of crops that are on a multi-year cycle at this time. So I guess the takeaway is that there have been a variety of specific challenges and impacts resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. What I've summarized here is really just kind of a snapshot of the average across the industry, but we do have all those disaggregated reports available online if anyone's interested. The effects can be broadly summarized under the loss of revenue, lost sales, effects on labor, and challenges with inputs, goods, and services. I want to just point out that in Q1, we had 13% of respondents say that their farm or business would not survive 3 months without external intervention, and that increased to 32% when the time frame was increased to 6 months. In Q2, that went down to 7% of respondents saying that their farm or business would not survive for 3 months without external intervention. And similarly, that extension to 6 months also was reduced this time to 17%. Respondents did indicate that federal and state assistance was helpful to their business for survival. And I think the results of the survey so far suggest that there will be longer term economic effects for the US aquaculture industry. The last comment I want to make, and I think I'm out of time, but I just wanted to acknowledge the USDA FSA CFAP-1 program. Those applications began on August 17th, and a number of aquaculture crops were eligible. CFAP-1 relief funds have provided some much needed cash relief for aquaculture farms, and you can track the payments that are happening on the USDA website. Q3 survey, which is launching on Monday, October 5th, should capture CFAP-1 results, and CFAP-2, which has also been announced results, will be captured in our Q4 survey. And with that, this is where you can find the disaggregated reports and an editorial that myself and Matt Smith and Dr. Carol Engel wrote about this, summarizing these results. And I also want to just acknowledge NOAA and Sea Grant for their support in providing some funding for us to be able to carry forward this work for the duration of the year. And to thank you for your attention. And I don't think I have time for questions, but I'd be happy to answer any in the chat.